You built something that looks like strength, and it has been quietly costing you every relationship that ever had real potential. You don't chase. You don't beg. You hold yourself together in ways most people never will. From the outside, that looks powerful. It looks like self-respect. It looks like someone who knows her worth. But there is something underneath that composure, something you may have never been willing to name, and it is not strength. It is a wound that learned how to walk upright. It dressed itself in the language of self-worth and emotional independence, and it became so convincing that even you believe it most of the time. The most unsettling part is this: the pattern has grown so familiar that you genuinely cannot tell the difference anymore between protecting yourself and slowly destroying everything you actually want. What you are about to hear is the part no one told you. Most women who carry this pattern were never weak. That is the first thing to understand. The women who build emotional fortresses are almost always the ones who felt things most deeply, who loved without reservation and then watched that love be dismissed, used against them, or left somewhere they could not retrieve it. They did not build walls because they stopped caring. They built them because they cared so completely that exposure became something the nervous system could no longer afford. And somewhere along the way, a quiet internal decision was made. Not consciously, not deliberately. The kind of decision the body makes for you in the middle of the night after enough pain accumulates. The decision that says, never again. Never be that available. Never be that visible. Never let someone that close to the center of you. And then something strange happened. That decision began producing behaviors that looked and felt exactly like personal power. Not chasing felt like self-worth. Emotional distance felt like emotional intelligence. The ability to leave without looking back felt like freedom. People noticed. The dynamic shifted. You were treated differently. The behaviors worked. So you kept doing them. Not because you were performing anything, but because something that once protected you from genuine pain became your default operating system, even in situations where there was no real threat. Even with people who showed up for you consistently. Even with someone good, willing, and standing right in front of you. And this is where it gets darker. Because what started as survival has now become the very thing your love life cannot survive. The first layer of this pattern does something most women who carry it never fully see. It makes vulnerability feel like danger, even when the person in front of you has given you no real reason for it. When you have been genuinely hurt, not in a small way, but in a way that rewired how you move through emotional closeness, your nervous system stops distinguishing between the person who caused that pain and the person standing in front of you now. This is not a character flaw. It is one of the most sophisticated protective responses the human mind produces. Psychologists call it hypervigilance within attachment, the low-level, continuous scanning for signs of threat, even in environments that are genuinely safe, especially there. So when someone begins showing up for you consistently, when a relationship starts to become real rather than theoretical, something inside you does not register that as safety. It registers it as exposure. And exposure, your body has learned, is what comes just before the fall. So without fully knowing what you are doing, you begin to manage the distance. Not dramatically, not in ways you could easily name. You go slightly cooler, a little less available. You stop responding with the same warmth. And you tell yourself this is balance, this is standards, this is just you not being too much. But what is actually happening is a quiet measurement. You are watching, tracking whether he will chase, fold, or hold steady. And the ones who respect your energy and give you space get filed away as not interested enough. The ones who push harder confirm something the wound already believed, that love means being pursued rather than simply chosen. The pattern becomes self-sealing. It filters out the very thing it was built to survive without. The second layer is more invisible, and it is the one that tends to land hardest. This pattern makes genuine intimacy feel like a loss of self. There is a specific internal experience that women carrying this pattern know well, even if they have never spoken it clearly. When a relationship starts to feel real, when closeness becomes something you can actually feel rather than manage, something shifts beneath the surface. Not excitement, something closer to dread. a quiet pullback reflex that frames itself as needing independence, needing space, needing to remain someone who is not consumed. And those needs are real, but they are also being used as shelter for something much older than the current relationship. The part of you that knows, with a certainty built from experience, that real intimacy means real exposure, and real exposure means something that can be taken from you. And this is the part most people completely miss. The grief that follows these self-created endings is genuine, but so is the hand that quietly made them happen. Women who have carried this pattern across years, particularly those navigating relationships in their late 30s and 40s, often describe a specific kind of reckoning, a moment of looking back over a landscape of relationships that almost became something. Almost. And realizing the almost was not always the other person's failure. Sometimes the almost was their own hand reaching for the exit before the thing could fully begin. Not out of cruelty, out of the oldest fear there is, the fear of letting something matter enough to break them. The third layer closes the loop in the most painful way. This pattern makes you fall hardest for the people who cannot actually reach you. The avoidant nervous system carries a specific gravitational pull toward emotional unavailability. Not because pain is what you want, but because distance feels familiar, and familiar registers as safety. So the person who is warm, consistent, emotionally present, and genuinely interested often produces a feeling that gets misread as a lack of chemistry. But the person who runs hot and cold, who keeps you slightly off balance, who makes you work for something you can never quite hold, that person creates an urgency your body mistakes for passion. What is actually happening beneath that feeling is simpler and more devastating. Your nervous system has found a match, a wound recognizing another wound. And the relationship will feel more alive than anything else. And it will hurt in all the familiar ways. And it will end precisely where it always ends, with exactly the kind of disconnection that taught you to protect yourself in the first place. Before we go any further, one question worth sitting with right now. How many times have you told yourself the story that someone was not ready for you, when the fuller truth was that you were not ready for them? Not because you were not enough, but because being fully present, fully open, fully real, fully inside something that could be lost, is something this pattern will not yet allow. That discomfort you feel the moment someone genuinely tries to close the distance, that is not a signal to leave. That is the exact edge where the pattern lives. But what happens next reveals the real psychology. Because the deepest layer of this pattern is not about the people you hold at arm's length. It is about what you have come to believe love is supposed to feel like. When early experiences of love came attached to pain, to instability, to someone who was there and then wasn't, to caring more than you were cared for, your emotional nervous system formed a map. And on that map, love was turbulent. Love was something you had to earn through endurance. Real, steady, consistent love. The kind that doesn't fluctuate, doesn't require you to perform, doesn't produce that specific anxious charge in your chest, often doesn't register on that map at all. It doesn't feel like love because it doesn't feel like what love always felt like. This is where cognitive dissonance quietly dismantles the relationships that could have actually mattered. You want peace, but peace reads as the absence of feeling. You want someone reliable, but reliability feels flat where volatility once felt like aliveness. And so the very things that would genuinely nourish you become the things that make you suspicious. And here is what nobody talks about. The strength you built, the self-containment, the composure, the refusal to chase, was real protection at a real moment in your life. It was necessary. It was not wrong. But armor does not know when the war is over. It keeps doing its job long after the threat has passed, and the person who needed protecting gets kept inside it, alone, in a relationship that looks composed from the outside and is quietly starving at the center. You do not need to abandon yourself to be loved. You need to become someone who can stay present long enough, with the right person, in the right moment, to find out what is actually on the other side of the wall. What this pattern ultimately reveals is a truth worth carrying. Strength and self-protection are not the same thing, and confusing the two has a cost. Real strength is not the ability to need nothing. It is the capacity to stay open when every trained reflex inside you is pulling toward the door. It is choosing to be seen, fully, without performance, by someone who has actually earned it. You built something to survive. That is evidence of how deeply you once felt and how much you were willing to protect that feeling. But surviving and living are two different things, and no amount of composure, emotional independence, or perfectly maintained distance will fill the place where real connection was supposed to live. The woman on the other side of this pattern, the one who learned to stay, to feel, to let herself be chosen, what love becomes for her is something that deserves its own conversation. And that conversation begins somewhere else. But before you go, tell me this. Has there ever been someone who showed up for you consistently? Someone who was genuinely there, and something inside you still found a reason to hold them at a distance you could never quite explain? If that moment lives in you somewhere, say something below. You are not the only one carrying it.